Welcome back. The news in details. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi followed up on Tuesday the executive status of preparations ahead of the transfer to the new administrative capital. This came during the President's meeting with Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli, Minister of Housing, Utilities and Urban Communities Asim al-Ghazzar, and the Presidential Advisor for Urban Planning. President al-Sisi was briefed on the latest steps to transfer ministries and governmental bodies to the new administrative capital. The head of state gave his directives for construction work to continue according to schedule. Meanwhile, Minister al-Ghazzar reviewed housing plans for employees at the new administrative capital, especially measures needed to facilitating real estate financing for housing units. An international naval drill of Southern Fleet in the Red Sea kicked off on Tuesday and will last for several days with the participation of Egyptian naval forces and the command of the Western Joint Forces. This comes within the framework of General Command of the Armed Forces plan to upgrade the level of exercise and exchange of expertise with the armed forces of friendly countries. The exercises include means of combating naval unconventional threats, carrying out naval security measures, securing important shipments, facing naval mines, medical training, leadership and control training. The drill is considered one of the biggest international naval joint drills in the world and the Middle East. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli gave his directives to intensify efforts to alleviate the sufferings of patients and their families in accordance with directives of President al-Sisi. Following up efforts by the Higher Medical Committee during January, Madbouli also received a report by committee head Dr. Hussein al-Masri, the Cabinet's medical counsellor. The Prime Minister praised efforts by the committee and its swift handling of emergency calls by citizens. For his part, Dr. al-Masri said 450 emergency calls had been addressed in January, including 146 which were transferred to state-funded treatment and 123 surgeries were conducted. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry received a video call from U.S. climate envoy John Kerry. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson explained that Shoukry affirmed Egypt's keenness as president of the 27th session of the Conference of Parties to Climate Change to build on the momentum achieved in the Glasgow conference to promote international action to confront climate change at all levels, especially with regard to exerted efforts that help to adapt with the negative impacts of climate change. Shoukry stressed that Egyptian presidency of the 27th session will work to reach results that reflect the international aspiration to confront climate change while giving attention to developing countries' support. Concluding the call, Shoukry and the U.S. envoy expressed the importance of continued consultation and coordination between the two sides on the climate issue in light of the strategic relations between the two countries. The National Media Authority decided on Tuesday to refer broadcaster Hossein Haddad to investigation and suspend him from work for what he said on the Good Morning Egypt program broadcast on Channel 1. The National Media Authority confirmed that it stands at one distance from all Egyptian clubs and deals with complete impartiality. The authority further affirmed that all Egyptian sports clubs have all the appreciation and respect, wishing them success in their achievements that enrich Egyptian sports. The Israeli occupation forces killed 3 Palestinians in the West Bank on Tuesday. The armed wing of the Palestinian Fatah group claimed the 3 martyrs as members. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry condemned the killing as a field execution. Israel's Shin Bet security service claimed the victims were armed. Dozens of Yemeni pro-government fighters have been killed in a new offensive to take the rebel-held city of Harda. Sources said on Tuesday 32 soldiers had died and at least 100 others injured in 3 days of fighting to drive Houthi rebels from Harad, north of the capital Sana'a and near the Saudi border. The sources said fighting was still raging around Harad, adding that loyalists had besieged the area but are yet to seize the city. One loyalist source said at least 56 rebels were killed in the fighting and accompanying coalition airstrikes. The latest clashes come after the Houthi rebels, after suffering territorial defeats to the UAE-trained troops, killed 3 oil workers in a series of drone and missile attacks on Abu Dhabi. Libya's eastern-based parliament said on Tuesday there would be no elections this year and it would choose a new interim prime minister on Thursday. The parliament, which has been working on a political roadmap since the collapse in December of a planned election process amid disputes over the vote's rules and constitutional basis, voted on Monday to adopt the plan. The internationally recognized government of national unity, which was installed a year ago through a UN-backed peace process, says its mandate is still valid and that it has no intention of stepping aside. French President Emmanuel Macron arrived in Berlin on Tuesday for talks with the leaders of Germany and Poland on the Ukraine crisis after a round of shuttle diplomacy between Moscow and Kiev. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who himself just returned from a visit to Washington dominated by the Ukraine tensions, is hosting the meeting with Macron and Polish President Andrzej Duda in a bid to present a united front.
After conducting an urgent round of shuttle diplomacy between Moscow and Kiev, French President Emmanuel Macron said on Tuesday he saw a path forward on easing tensions with Russia over Ukraine. Macron held talks with Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky in Kiev a day after a meeting with Russia's Vladimir Putin in Kremlin as the West scrambles to defuse fears Moscow could invade its ex-Soviet neighbor. The French leader said he now saw the possibility for talks involving Moscow and Kiev over the festering conflict in eastern Ukraine to move forward and concrete practical solutions to lower tensions between Russia and the West. Macron said Putin had told him that Russia would not be the source of an escalation in the situation despite amassing more than 100,000 troops and military hardware on Ukraine's border. The Russian leader said several proposals put forward by Macron could form a basis for further steps on easing the crisis over Ukraine, but did not give any details. For his part, Zelensky said he hoped separate talks of high-ranking officials in Berlin on Thursday could pave the way for a summit with the leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France and Germany aimed at reviving the stalled peace plan for Kiev's conflict with Moscow-backed separatists. Meanwhile, Macron arrived in Berlin for talks with Polish President and German Chancellor. At the time, as sending its military hardware to Ukraine's borders, Putin has issued demands the West says are unacceptable, including barring Ukraine from joining NATO and rolling back alliance forces in Eastern Europe. Moscow kept bolstering its forces around Ukraine on Tuesday as it announced 6 warships were heading to the Black Sea from the Mediterranean as Kiev plans to hold its own exercises involving anti-tank missiles and combat drones. U.S. President Joe Biden warned to end the controversial new Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia to Europe if tanks rolled into Ukraine, while Germany said it was very clear Russia would face harsh consequences if it invades the country.
A Taliban delegation is visiting Geneva for talks with Swiss officials and NGOs on humanitarian access and human rights. Switzerland's foreign ministry said Tuesday that the members of the delegation will have discussions around humanitarian access to populations in need, the protection of humanitarian actors and respect for human rights, stressing that their presence in Switzerland did not constitute recognition of the regime.
A Taliban delegation was in Geneva on Tuesday for a week of NGO-hosted talks on humanitarian access and human rights as crisis besieged Afghanistan's new rulers expand their international engagement. The delegation will also meet with Swiss and other European officials plus the Red Cross, though Switzerland's foreign ministry insisted that their presence on Swiss soil did not constitute recognition of the regime. The movement seized control in mid-August as the United States ended its 20-year war in Afghanistan. Since then, Afghanistan has plunged into financial chaos, with inflation and unemployment surging, while the halting of aid has triggered a humanitarian crisis in a country already devastated by decades of war. The Geneva Call Foundation, which works to protect civilians during conflict, said it was hosting a conference on Afghanistan behind closed doors from Monday to Friday, aimed at enhancing unimpeded the delivery of humanitarian assistance in the country. Geneva Call said it had therefore invited the Taliban to a conference to discuss the status of human assistance, the protection of civilians, respect of healthcare, and the issue of landmines and explosive remnants of war. In his first interview since returning from talks with Western powers in Oslo, the regime's foreign minister, Amir Khan Muttaqi, said that Taliban feel they are inching closer towards international recognition. The Geneva delegation was being led by Latifullah Hakimi and number around 10 people. A representative from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation and from the Foreign Ministry's Peace and Human Rights Division and its Asia and Pacific Division are also due to meet the delegation this week. They will also discuss humanitarian access, the protection of aid workers and respect for human rights and the protection of children.
North Korea boasted on Tuesday that it is one of only a handful of countries in the world to field nuclear weapons and advanced missiles, and the only one standing up to the United States by shaking the world with missile tests. North Korea's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said in a statement it can shake the world by firing a missile with the U.S. mainland in its range. The statement said the series of tests since New Year represented remarkable achievements that strengthened North Korea's war deterrence. According to the ministry, there were more than 200 countries in the world, but only a few have hydrogen bombs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and hypersonic missiles. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau vowed on Tuesday to bring an end to a trucker protest still paralyzing the capital, Ottawa, as the movement against COVID-19 restrictions fast becomes a rallying cry for far-right and anti-vaccine groups. Coronavirus has killed at least 5.8 million people since the outbreak emerged in China in December 2019, and the U.S. has recorded the most COVID deaths, followed by Brazil, India, and Russia.
Canadian lawmakers expressed increasing worry Tuesday about the economic effects of disruptive demonstrations after the busiest border crossing between the U.S. and Canada became partially blocked by truckers protesting vaccine mandates and other COVID-19 restrictions. In New Zealand, hundreds of people protesting vaccine mandates and the pandemic restrictions blocked streets outside the New Zealand's parliament with trucks and camper vans, inspired by similar demonstrations in Canada. Protesters were largely unmasked, held placards calling for freedom, and vowed to camp outside Parliament until the COVID-19 curbs are lifted. Hong Kong announced stringent new coronavirus restrictions and record new coronavirus infections, while a shortage of vegetables added to the misery as truck drivers who tested positive for COVID-19 were unable to bring them from mainland China. The Asian financial hub reported a record of 625 coronavirus cases, with cases likely to continue rising rapidly. There were 2,600 infections over the past 2 weeks, compared with just 2 in December. Responding to worrying trend, Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam said public gatherings would be limited to 2 people from 4 currently, while churches and hair salons would close from Thursday, joining a slew of venues already closed. Lam also announced a ban on private gatherings of more than 2 families, though it was unclear how authorities would enforce it. Meanwhile, Italy's government lifted an obligation to wear masks outdoors under most circumstances in response to an improving coronavirus situation and said it aimed to raise attendance limits at stadiums. Under new rules set by the health minister, from February 11th until at least March 31st, it will be necessary to wear protective masks only in crowded areas and at indoor public venues. The ministers said in a statement that from that date, they intend to raise attendance ceilings to 75% of capacity for outside stadiums and 60% for indoor ones. The limit currently stands at 50% of capacity outside and 35% inside.
Now it's time for the economic news, and these are the headlines. Egypt's stock market indices collectively slide by profit-making deals. The ECB is in no rush to hike interest rates. And the U.S. trade deficit rises in December, and the deficit in 2021 is the largest on record. Welcome back. Egypt's stock indices collectively retreated in the trading session on Tuesday after being affected by profit-making selling operations by foreign investors on leading stocks. The benchmark EGX 30 index slid by 0.18%. The EGX 70 index for small and medium businesses also slid by 0.38%. Analysts said profit-making selling operations by foreign investors and investment funds led indices to slide early in the trading session and exceeded selective purchasing operations by local and Arab investors.